On Thursday, I was driving down towards town and I noticed a plume of smoke. I always feel a little bit uneasy around smoke and fire, but I just chose to, notice it and leave it for then. By the time I'd come back, it was quite a bit larger. And I mentioned it to my husband, who felt I was being a little bit overreactive. It's like I mentioned, I have a fear around smoke and fire. My mother's house burned down in really huge fires in her hometown, Neisner, in 2017. So I know how quickly things can go pear-shaped. But then the wind picked up. And then we knew we being the collective community, were in big trouble. That fire got big really, really, really quickly. And it was declared an emergency on the emergency WhatsApp group, and there was many very panicked messages coming through. People were evacuating. Now, it started probably about 4 to 5 kilometers in terms of how the crow flies, the distance that the crow would fly. But people were being evacuated as close as 1.5 kilometers down the road from us. Fortunately, the wind was blowing away from us, so the fire was constantly moving further and further away from us. But we also knew that at any moment, if the wind direction changed, we'd need to be alert. We'd need to be prepared. My husband went out with our neighbor to go and fight the fires. The community response was just incredible. I stayed home with the kids feeling pretty powerless and a bit useless, I must be honest. And then that night, we finally had some helicopters arrive from another province, but they couldn't fly beyond dark. So when we went to bed that night, I climbed up to the highest part of our land here and had a look, and there was just an orange glow still over a huge portion of the land. The wind was still not blowing in our direction, but it was very, very hard to sleep that night. And we both kept our phones close to us, and I woke up regularly checking messages, and there were messages like people saying, please come help me, I can't contain this fire, it's getting big, I need support, because it was flaring up everywhere on different people's farms and different pieces of land. And the next day they managed to sort of get control of it, and then on the Sunday the wind picked up again, and it had moved in a different direction, but again, still not quite in our direction, but had moved enough that way away from us that if the wind now turned, it would come in our direction. My husband again went out, this time for the full day. It only started in the second half of the day on the Thursday. This is now Saturday. And my husband went out with our neighbor again. Again, this is the response in this town. Just incredible. So many people just volunteering and going out into the field and fighting the fire. And they managed to mainly contain it, but it has continued. There have been flare-ups since then, continuing. So that was from Thursday. Today, as I record this, it's Wednesday. So it's almost a week. We've had the helicopters flying regularly. We've had spotter planes. We've had crews come in, fire crews coming in from various different places to try to support the local fire station. So it's been hectic, and there are a couple of metaphors that have cropped up from this fire, which I feel ready to share now, because we really feel like we're just kind of a bit on edge at the moment. So I'm going to speak to that as one of the things that's important in relation to chronic fatigue and burnout. The first thing, though, I want to speak about is the relationship we have to nature and to land, and how this is related to our health and chronic fatigue and burnout. So I'm going to start that by reading a very interesting little mythical story that was shared in our local WhatsApp group by someone. So if you're not from South Africa, I'll try and explain, because you may not understand this fully. Okay, so it goes like this. Along the coast, where rivers thin out into reeds and houses still wore thatch like a second skin, people tell a darker story about spoorbeck. One whispered when flames crackled too eagerly. Okay, spoor means tracks. So typically you would look for animal spoor in the bush. So spoorbeck, beck is a mouth, but basically this is like a spirit. This is it's a nature spirit, but it's also what they're talking about is tracks. The tracks that are seen. You'll understand now as I go further. In a dry year when winter rains came late and the reeds cured hard and pale, spoorbeck swam higher up in the estuary than ever before. The water was warm, too still. His spoor showed everywhere, broken stems, nervous mullet, birds standing watch. The fishermen read the signs, and they felt uneasy, but no one spoke of it aloud. That same season, a village fire started small, just a cooking flame caught by a wandering wind. The thatch took it eagerly, roof to roof. The fire ran like it knew the way. People said afterwards that it moved as if following spoor. When the fire was finally beaten down, only ash and blackened poles remained. The river nearby was strangely quiet. Days later, spoorbeck returned to the shallows, scarred but alive. An old fisherman watching him said, "Hy het ons gewaarsku." He warned us. Spoorbeck had come upriver early because the balance was wrong, too dry, too careless, too rushed. From then on, the people changed their ways. They cleared fire breaks around their homes. They wet their thatch before lighting evening fires. They built clay collars around chimneys and kept water barrels close. And like fishermen reading the river, they learned to read danger before it burned. The elders say spoorbeck does not cause fire, just as he does not cause storms. He leaves spoor, signs, for those willing to look. Ignore them, and the fire runs free. Notice them, and the village stands. So when a thatch roof survives a long hot summer without flame, people will say quietly, spoorbeck swam early that year. So now what I like about the story is the importance of listening to the signs that nature provides. And when I read it, I was aware of how we have become so disconnected from nature. We would have, our ancestors many years ago would have been far more aware of when there's a possibility of a fire, for instance, and the things that we'd need to look out for and the things we'd need to do. We were in touch with the natural cycles and rhythms, what moon cycle we're in, how it impacts the growing season, how it impacts our energy even. And because we're so disconnected from nature now, we don't see the signs. We don't have enough time. We don't feel we have enough time to stop and to do the things we're being called to do by nature. What I wanted to share here is that nature is feminine energy. And what's also feminine energy is our bodies. The body is feminine. Our emotions are feminine. Our feelings, so our physical sensations within the body, these are feminine experiences. And we have tended to disconnect from all that is feminine. So if you look at this as a metaphor, or the relationship to the land as a metaphor to the relationship to our bodies, we have disconnected from our bodies. We have stopped listening to what our bodies need. We have stopped heeding the warning signs our bodies give us. We've just have lost that relationship completely with the feminine. And instead, we're caught up in the distorted masculine energy, which is around moving, doing, knowing, succeeding, achieving. It's about holding everything together. And yes, of course, we need some of this energy. We wouldn't function if it was all feminine energy. But we have overly invested in masculine energy and disconnected from feminine energy, and therefore lost that vital connection to our bodies, to nature, to be able to listen to the warning signs and to come back to nurture and care for the land and for our bodies in ways that will support us. So that was the first metaphor I wanted to share with you. So let me give you an example of what I mean by listening to the warning signs. So when we're not sleeping very well, when we're feeling a little bit lightheaded or dizzy, when we're easily overwhelmed and irritated, when we've started to lose focus and concentration, when we've lost joy and motivation, these can all be signs of burnout and an imbalance in the body. There are other aspects as well. But what we tend to do then is either we just push through, or maybe we stop for a day and then feel like that should be enough. We need to get on with things now. Look, I'm not wanting to invalidate the fact that it's flipping hard to survive right now. Survival feels like it's harder and harder to just make a living, right? I know this doesn't make logical sense, but I have discovered in my own life that the more I look after myself, the more that I take time to nurture my relationship to the land and to my body, the more money shows up. Because money in itself has its own energy, it also has to do with the feminine and abundance. I'm not going to go too much into that, but I just want to address that because I know a lot of you are going to think, well, I don't have time to stop. And it can really feel like that. I know it so well. And I still battle when I feel the warning signs to take the time out. I have to really go against that part of me that goes into fear and driving and pushing, and learn to trust that when I take the time, I come back so much stronger and have more capacity and more to give, not just towards my work, but towards my family and obviously my friends and for myself. So this is the first metaphor I wanted to take from that is fire is not a bad thing. Fire warms us. It can transform. Fire has the energy of transformation. It is when fire is not attended to. It's when we take it for granted. It's when we're careless around fire that it can rage out of control. And we need fire in our bodies. Our fire is actually our life force. It's a feminine quality. It's the essence of life force. It's actually also sexual essence and creative essence. It's all the same thing. And when we don't nurture it, when we're not connected to that relationship, that fire can go out of control and burn us out. Okay, because we're not channeling it very well, we're not caring for it, we're not literally allowing, because this is the other thing is that the energy of fire actually can also even nurture us, because it is life force, like I said, and we can learn to work with it if we're connected enough, if we can listen to our bodies. This is a lot of the somatic work that I do. It's a lot of the embodied practices of working with masculine and feminine have to do with how to work with the flame, how to work with feminine energy, how to work with the earth. In fact, this is a lot of what I will be sharing in my rooted retreat in February. So I'll drop the link below if that's something that might interest you. So there you go. Metaphor number one, the importance of being connected to the feminine for vitality and health. The second metaphor was, yes, okay, it's about the nervous system response. Because I posted a little post in our group to just kind of psychoeducate people around what to expect with trauma. Because we all have very, very natural responses when there's something like this happening, which would be an acute stress response. So that's going to generally, for most people, be a fight-flight response. And that would then lead to things like feeling like we need to run away, get as far away as possible, wanting to get out there and do something. So like for me, sitting at home and needing to stay with my kids near the house, because obviously I didn't want to leave my house and my kids in case something happened and I wasn't here. And then my husband being out in the field fighting, that not being able to do anything was really hard, because the energy was, that masculine energy in a very healthy way for the circumstances was pushing me to fight, to go fight the fire, to do something to fix it. So there's there's a restlessness, there's a moving energy, there's a wiredness, there's an urgency. This is all very necessary in this context. It's what can happen though is that once the threat has eased, for quite a while, people's nervous systems are not just going to settle back into a rest digest state. They stay elevated, which is why a lot of us still are not sleeping very well. And that elevation can also show up as irritation, easily startled, constantly alert. Like I woke up the one night convinced I could smell smoke. There was actually nothing. For actual trauma responses, there might even be a reliving and re-experiencing of trauma situations like seeing, hearing, smelling, feeling in the body certain sensations that were experienced within the original trauma experience. So the reason I'm sharing this is because what can happen is, ideally over time, this then will settle as the frontal cortex makes sense of the situation. So the frontal cortex is the part that gives meaning to something. And this part of the brain is always processing information and needing to file it away in a certain way. And when we have a stress response, like an acute stress response or trauma, we go into the hindbrain, the more primal part of the brain, which is the one that drives us to respond to stress, to save ourselves. It's a survival response. And you can't have both of them working at the same time. So the frontal cortex shuts down, and there's no processing happening at the time of the trauma. So what happens is, once the trauma has passed, once the danger has passed, then the frontal cortex wants to make sense of the information. And so that's where the stress response will come from, and the trauma symptoms will come from. And the sooner that we can allow our body to process the feelings, the thoughts, the memories, the sooner it settles and then can go back into a rested state. So that's always very interesting, because what can also happen with trauma or acute stress is that there's a shutdown response. So that's the flip side of the fight-flight. And if there's a shutdown response, there's a disconnection from the body. There's a not being able to remember even. Some people actually, like after quite severe traumas, people can actually forget completely, which is a protective mechanism, but it makes it very hard to process the trauma. So where there's a disconnection, a disconnecting, a dissociating, a shutting down response, it's another stress, it's another acute to chronic stress response or trauma response, and that makes it very hard to process. So I just wanted to bring those up, because what happens is many of us have gone through traumas, and many of us don't even necessarily realize that we were traumatized in certain situations. So just for relevance, or just to clarify, the very base description of trauma is any situation in which you felt yourself or someone you love was under threat. Okay, so that you can then understand in the context of a fire, for instance. However, trauma also includes any situation in which it felt unsafe to be your authentic self. In other words, if I show up with this anger, am I still going to be considered lovable? Will I be punished? Will I be rejected? Will I be abandoned? And so we learn to adapt ourselves, because the trauma of potential separation, abandonment, rejection is too great. These are also trauma experiences, especially if they happen chronically. Okay, so many of us have experienced those to some degree. These are what we'd call small t traumas. And unfortunately for some, they're very severe. So that's like an abuse situation. So many of us have experienced traumas which we think we've resolved, which we think our brains have processed. But because we've disconnected, shut down, or avoided thinking about or remembering or feeling the feelings related to those experiences, they continue to sit in our nervous system. And we create a nervous system template that is therefore very easily activated by anything that happens in the present moment that is in any way similar to the past, specifically around feeling powerless, unsupported, or under threat in some way. So that means we can go through life feeling constantly a little bit wired, a little bit of that sense of urgency or scarcity, a little bit overwhelmed, a little bit irritated, a little bit like we just want to run away. That's it, kind of goes with that overwhelm again. Or a little bit shut down, a little bit frozen. These are all chronic stress responses, which actually mean that the nervous system is not regulated, which means that we are not easily staying in that lovely space of rest and digest. We are too quickly going into a fight, flight, or a freeze response, or even a fawning response, which is people pleasing. This is where we monitor other people's responses very, very carefully and find ourselves trying to appease them and keep them happy so they won't be disappointed in us or angry with us. So again, it's to avoid, rejection, criticism, abandonment, etc. Okay, so I'm bringing this up because this is really important to understand that when we are living in a mild, even just a kind of a low grade stress or trauma response for large portions of our life, we cannot be producing vitality. To the point that cell danger response, this is a theory that was shared by Robert, I think his name was Navio, and he stated that the mitochondria, which are the powerhouses within our cells, the mitochondria cannot create energy when they are in cell danger response. As soon as the brain perceives a threat, the body activates itself, as we spoke about with the fires, and the mitochondria go into cell danger response to signal threat to the rest of the cells in the body. They cannot be producing energy and be in cell danger response at the same time. So we can spend a lot of our life in cell danger response, low-grade cell danger response even, and get stuck there. There's actually stages as well. I'm not going to go too much into it, but we can get stuck in different stages of where our body is signaling trauma or signaling danger, and then we can't get out of it into the place where the body then goes back into a reparative or rested state. On top of that, when we are stressed, there are various different responses that happen which are very vital and important in times of trauma and stress. So for instance, the gut will shut down so it doesn't use up too much energy, because that energy needs to be reserved for our fight-flight responses. Our eyesight will narrow and become more like tunnel vision. There's more blood that's pumped to certain parts of the body versus other parts. So our limbs, we can feel like our limbs are heavy and rubbery. The arteries in certain places are going to increase and other places are going to decrease. So you can feel dizzy, you can feel all sorts of different responses. So the nausea, the dizziness, the feeling like your heart is racing, these are all very important responses in the right context. But when these are happening, even just on a low-grade basis, chronically, it's going to affect your capacity to have health, because you cannot be metabolizing properly, you cannot be producing energy properly, you're not breathing properly, receiving the correct amount of oxygen properly, because you begin to hyperventilate a little bit in that state. Okay, so this is why it's important to understand this low-grade stress trauma response that many of us live in without even realizing it. The third thing I wanted to speak about is how incredible human beings are in crisis. And just speaking again to the amount of people that came out to fight the fires, the amount of people that bought food for all those who were fighting fires, food and water and mattresses for the visiting firefighters who were staying at the fire station, and someone donated a fridge and someone donated a trailer to help someone else's horses be evacuated. Like, it was just, everyone came together. Now, interestingly, that togetherness is also a feminine quality. Collaboration, connection, that's all feminine. So this was a beautiful example of masculine and feminine coming together. The masculine was the going out there, getting into action, doing, but the mobilizing of feminine collection, connectivity, community, and just such an amazing way that it showed up in this community lately. So yes, those were my three metaphors I wanted to share with you about burnout and fires. So I'm going to leave it there. Please, always, I love comments, I love questions and feedback. I'm always open to any of that. So please do reach out and stay safe, especially in South Africa and certain parts of the country. It is just so dry. Fires are coming up, are just showing up everywhere, flaring up everywhere. So stay safe, be careful, and just wishing you all the most amazing 2026. May this be a year of learning to balance your masculine and feminine energies. And if you need some support with that, I'm here.